The Yellow Labrador in Run 17 did not bark because she had stopped believing anyone would hear her. Down the concrete aisle, every other dog slammed into the gates, voices hoarse from begging. If you have ever walked a shelter row like that, you know how the loud ones grab you first and the quiet ones vanish. This Yellow Labrador did not vanish because she was calm. She vanished because she was folding herself away. Her coat was a pale sand color. People would have called beautiful once. Now she kept her head low, eyes fixed on the drain, paws jammed under her chest like the floor might open if she relaxed. When I whispered hello, the dog did not lift an ear or flick her tail. It felt less like meeting a puppy and more like staring at the outline of a dog who had already left. My name is Dean. I was 50 that fall, and I was just a weekend volunteer in a crowded shelter in Tacoma, Washington, walking rescue dogs nobody asked for. This Labrador did not rush the gate or test my hand through the bars. Marlo, the name on her card, stayed pinned to the back wall like the air in front of her was dangerous. The staff called her the easy one because she never barked, never messed her kennel, never made trouble for anyone. Easy dogs like that do not sell themselves to dog lovers who come hunting a playful puppy. They sink behind the noise until even puppy rescue people forget to look at them. I stood there longer than I meant to, fingers hooked around the cold gate, feeling her silence in my chest. Then I saw the faint rub line across her chest where a harness used to sit, a clean band on a dull yellow Labrador. On the bottom of her intake sheet, under her weight and age, 4 words were written in red that made my stomach turn over. Found waiting at crosswalk. That line on her card would not leave me alone that night. Found waiting at crosswalk. I sat in the break room with coffee going stale, Marlo's file open while the shelter went quiet. The report said the Yellow Labrador was picked up at an intersection near the hospital. No collar, no tag, just a dog planted at the curb while cars rolled past. The officer wrote that the walk signal kept flashing, but the Labrador never stepped off the sidewalk. She stood there, front paws pressed together, staring at the empty space beside her like someone should have been there. This dog did not search. This puppy did not pace or pull. The Yellow Labrador just waded through light after light until drivers started honking and someone finally called it in. When the officer approached, she did not back away from the hand. She only flicked her eyes once toward the painted lines on the street, as if asking permission to stay. He slipped a spare leash over her head because the Labrador would not move on her own. The moment her paws left that patch of sidewalk, this abandoned puppy tucked them tight to her chest like a worker leaving a post she thought was forever. By the time they carried her through our doors, she was silent inside. Looking from the report to the kennel cameras, I watched the other rescue dogs spin and bark and sell their dog stories to anyone who might listen. In Run 17, the Yellow Labrador lay folded into herself on the concrete, as if it were another curb. Under her weight and age, the line about the hold ending Monday glowed red. We were treating Marlo like any other quiet stray pup, but a dog who stands guard at a crosswalk alone is not just lost. She has already kept a promise, and the clock is still ticking over her head. Marlo was the only dog on the monitors who did not truly sleep. In a building full of barking and metal and nerves, there is always a moment when noise drops and even the wildest pup curls up and lets go. Every time I checked the night cameras, the Labrador in Run 17 was awake, body pressed flat to the back wall, eyes fixed on the gate like a guard waiting for a late shift that never ends. She would lie down, but never soften. Her paws stayed tucked, her spine stiff, like a dog who was afraid of what might happen if she let gravity have her. During visiting hours, families drifted down the aisle pointing at spinning youngsters and goofy puppies who sold themselves in the first 30 seconds. I watched dog lovers stop at almost every kennel, ask about each rescue dog, compare ages and colors and energy like they were shopping for a couch. Their eyes slid right over Marlo. When I brought bowls, the whole row exploded with noise and claws. Only after my footsteps faded did that quiet Labrador rise, take a few careful bites, then retreat to her post as if eating in front of witnesses broke some rule she still believed in. One evening, our vet, Dr. Patel, stood beside me in the tiny office while I scrolled back through the overnight footage. On the screen, the dog in Run 17 sat in that rigid half-sit, chest trembling in small waves you would miss if you were not looking. "That's not simple fear," he said, voice low. "Scared dogs bolt or fold. This one is clocking something that isn't coming through that door." His words hit harder than any lab result. If you have ever taken in a rescue dog and realized love alone did not touch the deepest wound, you know the feeling that washed over me then. The Labrador was not just shy or shut down. She was working, holding a place, keeping watch for a person who had already stepped out of her story. Standing in that humming office with a file in my hand and a tired pup on the screen, I understood that unless someone who knew that kind of waiting showed up, Marlo might keep her post right past Monday and never really come home to anyone at all. The woman who finally stopped at Run 17 did not look like someone shopping for a Christmas puppy. She moved down the aisle slowly, one hand on the railing, coat still damp from the rain. Dogs threw themselves at the gates for her, but her eyes slid past the noise like she was listening for something else. Her name was Ellen, 63, retired bus driver. At the front desk, she had said she was just looking, not sure she was ready after losing the old dog who waited at her stop every evening. I watched her pause for a goofy young Labrador, pat the muzzle of a senior dog, and whisper to a shaking little pup pressed into the corner. When she reached Marlo's kennel, she almost walked past. The Labrador was doing what she did best, shrinking against the back wall until she looked like part of the concrete. Then Ellen's hand stopped on the rail, and her shoulders went tight, as if some wire inside her had been tugged. "Tell me about that one," she said. Her voice didn't have the bright choosing tone I hear from people comparing a playful puppy and a calm family dog. I told her what we knew about this Labrador from the report, about the crosswalk, the waiting, the way this quiet pup refused to leave the curb until someone lifted her away. Ellen listened without blinking. Her eyes stayed on Marlo's tucked paws and fixed stare. "That's a working sit," she said at last. "That dog still thinks she's on duty, and her person is late." If you have ever watched a rescue dog stare at a door long after everyone else has gone home, you know how those words land. Between the barking kennels, something eased in my chest. The first thin picture of this silent puppy stepping off that invisible curb and choosing to walk beside someone again. Ellen didn't make a decision in front of the kennel glass. She asked if she could sit with the Labrador. 10 minutes later, we were in the small meat yard, drizzle hanging in the air, Marlo on a loose leash between us like a dog who had shown up for work and found no one to report to. Most puppies explode in that yard. They jump, bark, drag you to every smell. This Labrador stood in one spot, nose tilted toward the gate, eyes tracking every car that passed on the street outside the fence. Ellen lowered herself onto the bench with the slow care of someone who knows what it is to be watched. She didn't call the dog. She just sat there, hands open on her knees, and started talking about bus routes and schedules and the old mutt who waited every night at the corner stop. Marlo did not rush her, but the dog listened. You can tell when a rescue dog is taking in every word and pretending not to. Her ears tip back and forward just enough to betray her. When a delivery truck's air brakes hissed out on the road, the Labrador flinched toward the sound, then froze, as if remembering she no longer had a handler to guide. Ellen wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve. "She's been waiting on the wrong curb," she murmured. "I know what that feels like." If you've ever loved an abandoned puppy or a loyal working dog, you know that is the moment choices get made. By the time we walked back inside, Ellen's name was on the paperwork. The hold that would have ended Monday turned into an adoption for one quiet Labrador who still thought she was on duty. I wasn't there the first night Marlo stepped into Ellen's small house, but when Ellen later poured coffee into chipped mugs and showed me the photos on her phone, I could see the story in every frame. The dog didn't race around like a playful puppy. She walked a slow circle, checked each doorway, then settled by the front door with her paws tucked, as if the whole house was just a different kind of crosswalk, and her job, as always, was to wait. Ellen tried to pretend that having a Labrador posted at the front door was normal, but the house told on both of them. The dog hardly drank when anyone was watching. She waited until Ellen left the room, then padded to the bowl, took a few quick mouthfuls like a pup stealing from someone else's dish, and rushed back to her post. At night, when the older woman went to bed, the Labrador lay in the hallway with her nose toward the faint line of light under the door, paws tucked, muscles ready. By day 3, the quiet felt like a third presence in the small house. Ellen texted me pictures of this rescue dog curled into the same strip of floor, and I could see the worry in her messages. She had chosen a Labrador who lived like a shadow, and the shadow was not moving. When I talk, she listens, Ellen wrote, but she only really looks at the street. On the 4th night, the change came in the smallest way. Ellen couldn't sleep, so she sat in her recliner and scrolled through videos on her phone. Short clips from years of driving a city bus. Engines idling, doors sighing open, the soft electronic ding that told riders the next stop was coming. When that bell chimed out into the dark room, the Labrador at the door rose like she'd been called by name. Marlo didn't come to Ellen. She trotted to the window, tail tight, ears forward, scanning the empty sidewalk as if a line of people were about to stand up. Then she walked back to the front door and glanced over her shoulder, just once, with a look that made Ellen's chest hurt. That was when my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. Dean, she thinks her job is still out there, Ellen wrote. If this Labrador keeps listening for a bus that never comes, I don't know how to show her she's home now. The answer came as something between a mistake and a mercy. 2 nights after that text, Ellen fell asleep in her chair with the TV still murmuring, phone loose in her hand. Some late-night documentary about transit history rolled on, and suddenly the living room filled with the deep idle of engines and the soft ding of stop bells layered over each other. The Labrador lifted her head like a soldier hearing boots. Marlo rose from the door and walked toward the sound. Not frantic, not wild, just pulled. On the screen, buses slid through rain and snow, doors opening and closing, brakes sighing in that rhythm every commuter knows. The dog stood in front of the television, body loose for the first time, ears tracking each chime like a language she hadn't heard since she lost her person. Then she did something that made Ellen sit up straight and hold her breath. Marlo turned away from the TV and paced a small, careful loop through the room, nose flicking toward the hallway, the kitchen, the front door. It was the route of a dog checking on passengers before the next stop. This was not an anxious stray pup circling for an exit. This was a working Labrador running a pattern her bones still remembered. When she finished, she walked back to the recliner and stood beside Ellen's knee, eyes up, waiting. If you love dog stories, if you are one of those dog lovers who believes dogs never betray, you know what that gesture means. Without thinking, Ellen patted the cushion beside her. To her shock, the rescue dog climbed halfway up, front paws on the chair, head lowering onto Ellen's leg, while the engines hummed from the screen. For the first time, Marlo chose a person over a door. After that, Ellen started playing bus videos on purpose. Not all day, not as a crutch, but in the evenings when the house felt too quiet and the Labrador's stare got fixed on the street. The pattern worried me, even as it helped. Puppy Rescue had given this abandoned puppy a roof and a bed, but it felt like we were borrowing trust from an old route that no longer existed. So the next time I drove over with a bag of food and a folder of paperwork, I brought something else too. Marlo's microchip number, and a question about who exactly had taught this dog to wait at a crosswalk without moving. We called from Ellen's small kitchen, the 3 of us held together by one thin strip of numbers. Marlo lay under the table with her chin on Ellen's slipper, eyes half closed, breathing in time with the hum of the fridge. I read the microchip code to the woman on the other end, listening to keys click, to papers shuffle, to the small silence that means a rescue dog is about to grow a past. Female. 4 years old, the voice said. Registered as a mobility assistance Labrador for a Mr. Harold King, 75, retired school custodian. My stomach tightened. The address on the file was 3 blocks from the hospital where they found Marlo at the crosswalk. Under notes, there were short lines that hit harder than any long dog stories. Dog trained to ride City Bus Line 23, she read. Always boards at Maple and 3rd, exits at hospital entrance. Then, softer, incident on record 18 months ago. Handler collapsed near intersection during rainstorm. Witnesses report dog remained at curb and would not leave crosswalk until neighbors physically carried her away. If you are a dog lover's person, you know what those sending to a loyal puppy. This was not some abandoned puppy who drifted into traffic. This was a working Labrador whose whole identity was built on standing in one place and not moving without her person. The file ended with a date of death for Mr. King and a note that the dog had been surrendered by a relative who could not manage a service animal's needs. Ellen's hand went to her mouth. "Harold King," she whispered. "Maple and 3rd, line 23. She stared past me at the wall, seeing something that wasn't there. "I drove that route for 12 years, she said slowly. There was an old man with a brown cap and a Labrador who waited at my front door every morning. She sat so straight I used to joke she knew the schedule better than I did." Under the table, Marlo shifted, pressing closer to Ellen's ankle, like a dog hearing a word she almost remembers. The bus videos, the perfect sit at the crosswalk, the way this rescue dog scanned every doorway made a sudden, painful kind of sense. In one phone call, the quiet stray pup from Run 17 was gone. In her place was a partner who had lost her route, her person, and her job all in one rainy afternoon, now lying at the feet of the woman who had once opened those bus doors for both of them. Ellen did not speak for a long time after the call ended. The only sound in that little kitchen was the hum of the fridge and the slow breath of the Labrador under the table. I watched her thumb trace the edge of the printed report over the words "Bus Line 23," like a person worrying a scar. "I remember the night he didn't get on," she said at last. Her voice had the flatness of someone rolling back a tape they never wanted to play again. "It was raining sideways. I saw the ambulance lights by Maple and 3rd when I turned the corner." She swallowed. I told myself they already had it handled, that stopping would jam up the route. But when the supervisor called later and said Harold King died on his way to the hospital, I could not stop thinking about the dog he always had with him. If you love dog stories, you know the kind of guilt that lives in a loyal heart, human or canine. On one side of that crosswalk stood a Labrador who would not leave. On the other side sat a bus driver who kept the schedule moving because that was her job. Now, both were in the same kitchen, and the rescue dog was pressed against the ankle of the woman who used to open her door every morning. "I thought she was just some quiet stray when I picked her," Ellen whispered. But this is the same working dog who looked me in the eye at the curb and waited for my doors to hiss open. She lost her person that night, and I drove away. Marlo shifted at the sound of her name, one paw nudging deeper under Ellen's slipper like a small claim. In that moment, the story stopped being about an abandoned puppy saved by chance. It was about two partners who had both stayed too loyal to a job and a route that ended in the rain. If puppy rescue meant anything now, it had to reach further than a soft bed and bus videos on a screen. "We can't leave her whole life stuck at that corner," I said. Ellen nodded without looking up. "Then we go back," she answered. "Not for ghosts, for this dog." And just like that, we were planning to take a Labrador and an old bus driver back to Maple and 3rd to see if both of them were finally ready to step off the curb. We chose a wet evening on purpose, the kind of steady rain that turns streetlights into smears. Ellen pulled on her old Navy driver jacket and I clipped the leash to Marlo's collar. The Labrador's chest trembled under my hand before we left the driveway. When we turned onto Maple and 3rd, Marlo saw the corner first. Her trot slowed to a walk, then to stone. At the curb, she planted her front paws on the white paint and sat back straight, eyes fixed on the lane. Cars rolled past, wipers ticking, but this rescue dog did not move, like a worker who had shown up for a shift that never ended. Earlier that day, I had called an old dispatcher from my puppy rescue work and asked for one favor. Right on cue, a city bus eased toward the intersection with its sign dark. The doors opened with that long sigh every commuter knows. For a heartbeat, Marlo leaned toward the steps, tail stiff, searching for a man in a brown cap who would never climb them again. Then Ellen moved. She stepped up one step, turned, and held out her hand. "Marlo," she said, voice shaking, "route's changed. Your job now is to come with me." The Labrador looked at the empty crosswalk, at the open doors, at Ellen's palm. Then this abandoned puppy lifted her paws off the curb and climbed. Inside the bus, she leaned into Ellen's legs and let out a long breath, like a worker finally clocking out. We rode one slow loop around the block with no passengers, just the driver and one yellow Labrador. When the doors hissed open again at Maple and 3rd, Marlo stepped down, glanced once at the corner, then turned her back on it. The leash in my hand went loose for the first time. She fell into step beside Ellen, not guarding a curb, just walking home like a dog whose shift had finally ended. It's been months since that empty bus carried us once around the block, but the change in Marlo shows up in the smallest, homeliest ways. When I visit Ellen now, the Labrador meets me at the door like any ordinary house dog, nose pressed into my hand, tail doing a slow, steady swing instead of that tight, wired wag of a working pup on duty. She still glances at the street, but her body stays turned toward the living room, not the curb. Ellen's old Navy driver jacket hangs deep in the closet now. The TV sometimes plays something about buses by accident, an engine rumbling, a bell chiming, and I watch Marlo's ears twitch. For a second, the loyal puppy inside her notices, then she sighs and settles her head back on Ellen's knee. The bus is background noise, the person is the point. At night, this rescue dog does not lie at the front door anymore. Her bed sits halfway between the door and the worn recliner. Most evenings, the Labrador falls asleep with her spine against the chair and one paw resting on Ellen's foot, as if she's finally decided her route runs between that heart and that hallway. If you have ever brought home an abandoned puppy and waited months for them to choose you, you know how holy that simple wait can feel. Sometimes Ellen still walks past Maple and 3rd. She does it on purpose now, not as a punishment, but as proof. Marlo looks once at the crosswalk, once at the bus stop sign, and then keeps going, nose down, following the leash instead of a schedule. She is not a stray pup hunting for a job anymore. She is a yellow Labrador learning that a soft laugh and a hand on her ribs count as work too. Back at the shelter, when I stand in front of a quiet kennel and see another dog folded against the wall, I picture Marlo's paw resting on that recliner. Dogs never betray, but sometimes they do get stuck on old routes. Watching her breathe easy in a small house showed me something I hadn't been willing to name before, something I want you to carry the next time you walk past a silent cage. I still think about that first day I saw a silent Labrador pressed to the back wall of Run 17, eyes sliding past me like I was no one. If you had walked in then, you might have chosen a louder pup, a spinning rescue dog who made you laugh in the first 30 seconds. Most people do. That is how a loyal puppy like Marlo almost disappears while the world keeps moving around her. Now, when I sit in Ellen's living room and watch this yellow Labrador snore with her paw on that worn slipper, it feels like looking at a completely different dog. But she is not different. She is the same abandoned puppy who once planted herself at a crosswalk and refused to leave her post. The only change is that one person finally stopped, listened to her quiet dog story, and chose to stand where she was standing. If you are still watching this, I am asking you to remember her when you pass the silent kennels. The next invisible dog you see might be another working heart stuck on an old route, waiting for a hand instead of a bus. Dog lovers like you are the only reason puppy rescue means more than a roof and a food bowl. You are the bridge between an abandoned puppy curling into concrete and a sleeping dog leaning against someone's leg. Share Marlo's story with one person who understands dogs never betray. Send it to the friend who always stops for strays or cries over rescue dogs they have never met. Every view, every share is not just a number on a screen. It is one more chance for a quiet Labrador in some crowded shelter to be seen by the exact human who can change everything. When we do that together, one scared pup at a time, rescue stops being just a word on a form and starts to feel like hope you can touch.